Right, welcome to the video. It's been a while since I did one of these music videos. It's just a combination of work, trips away, doing more riding on my bike and so on and so forth. But there was one album I really wanted to talk about, and this goes back several weeks now, and I realized that I couldn't really explain what I liked about it, and yet it was a really great album. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll kind of have a little think about it a little bit. I'll do a bit of reading. I'll actually do a bit of writing to try and get my thoughts together as to why I think it's a particularly good album. And probably about 3 months late, I decided to, well, today I'm going to talk about this particular album. And the album is Lou Reed's New York, which is this album from 1989. And just a bit of background, really. I've always kind of been suspicious of Lou Reed fans. I was, he had this image, particularly in the early 70s, of being part of the glam movement. And of course, he was he set up and was the main musician and songwriter in the Velvet Underground. But, always suspicious of the fans because Lou Reed fans always liked Iggy, they always liked David Bowie, they always liked the New York Dolls. And there's something about where the style was almost as important as the music, and the music wasn't allowed to stand up on its own merits. And that's not how I've consumed music over the years. I've tried to put to one side any ideas or opinions that I might have about the musician's style, their look, their politics, perhaps, their backstory. I'm trying to just get into the zone where it's just me and the music. And Lou Reed was just one of a whole load of different artists who had been around or was around at the time when I was starting to collect records. And just like everybody else, probably, at least of my vintage, I was first exposed to the music of Lou Reed through Walk on the Wild Side. I used to record the chart rundown on BBC Radio 1 on a mono reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I remember recording, amongst many others, Walk on the Wild Side. But I never bought the album that came from Transformer, not early on, because one of the first things that I picked up on, and this is probably a review in Sounds or Melody Maker, or even the NME, which I was starting to buy in the early to mid 70s, is I bought this live album, Rock and Roll Animal, and this came with fantastic reviews, and I do remember that it's side one, its intro with Sweet Jane, where you have the twin guitars really rocking it, and it's really such a big dramatic opening. It's really quite stunning. I didn't get much beyond that. I mean, there's White Light, White Heat, Lady Day, Rock and Roll, and an extended version of Heroin. Never really resonated with me, but I loved the opening of that album, so I managed to get that. And then of course, what I did, like many people, I bought Berlin, which is interesting album. So really quite a gloomy album, of course. The Lou Reed fans will know this perfectly well. But yeah, quite remarkable. But at the same time, didn't include any great singles or kind of more poppy orientated material. It's just an album of a narrative of despair and tragedy. And I thought, well, what I needed, no, to be quite frank, what I realized is that Lou Reed was just one of those artists that I'd buy the occasional record of, and I'd buy the best ofs, or not greatest hits, but other live albums, Lou Reed Live, of course, which is the companion piece to Rock and Roll Animal. And he was just filed away, and then I picked up on Street Hassle, which came later on. I think that was in the late 70s as well. Yeah, 1978 on Arista Records. Really great album, but I'll tell you why I picked that up is because I became a Bruce Springsteen fan, and Springsteen does a monologue on the title track Street Hustle, which is an extended piece. But it's got other great tracks, Give Me Some Good Times, I Want to Be Black, Real Good Time Together, which I think he did with the Velvet Underground as well, but, proper Lou Reed fans will know more about that than I will. But yeah, good album. But anyway, 1979 kind of left me behind, really, after that, and it was, again, the result of probably a review in Q magazine, which I was then buying on a regular basis, that I came upon New York, and 5-star review, and I thought, well, maybe it's time to reappraise Lou Reed, because unlike genuine Lou Reed fans, I didn't have the patience or the interest to trawl through. He's probably done about 30 albums before his demise several years ago. So New York came along and I started taking an interest again. And what I did in preparation of kind of this video is I actually wrote things up, as I said at the very beginning, and I'm just going to refer to my notes occasionally here. What do I like about this particular album? Well, it's direct, it's deceptively simple, it's very involving, it's fresh, and it's energetic. So given by 1989 that he's been a successful rock artist and a performer for more than 20 years by that point, it's remarkable that he produced such an outstanding piece of work. Like I suggested, there'll be deep fans of Lou Reed who will sing the praises of other albums, but this particular one is, I've not heard anything out of his catalogue, and I've trawled through the remainder of it. Nothing that is so punchy and powerful and resonant as this particular one. It has variety. The songs are very varied. They're fast and slow, and it sounds as like I suggested, it sounds as clear as a bell. It's really beautifully recorded. You can tell it's recorded in a space. You can hear the decay on the cymbals and the drums, and it just feels incredibly dynamic, incredibly fresh. So it's a lovely sounding album as well. One of the things that I particularly like about it is that it's, whether you listen to it on random play, when you're in the car, or on your phone or iPad, the songs themselves individually stand up perfectly well. They're really great, but the whole thing hangs together as one coherent piece as well. So what did I learn? So it's now over 30 years since it was released, and 9 years since he died, and he died at age 71. I love this album now as just as I ever did. And it's one of these albums that I'm picking up about every 3 months and giving it a play all the way through. Some of the lyrical references are dated. He makes references to Kurt Waldheim and Jesse Jackson, the American politician. But the album's depiction of the dark underbelly of New York, I'm certain, are as true today as they were back then. So I knew it was an album I wanted to tip the hat to at some stage, but I realised I knew very little about Lou Reed, other than that he had a reputation for being difficult to get to know. So I pulled this book from my bookshelf, which had remained unread for about 20 years. It's a biography by Victor Bockris, and I don't know much about Victor Bockris, but my recollection is that he didn't like Lou Reed at all, and that's definitely comes through in this particular book. Because Lou Reed comes across here as an incredibly difficult character, really quite cruel, quite dismissive of other people around him. He obviously thought he was the bee's knees, some sort of a great artist with his links to Andy Warhol and the Factory and so on. But Bockris doesn't like him, and if you read this book, you kind of think, well, he's not the sort of guy, Lou Reed, that is, you'd want to spend any real time with, because even if he was a friend today, tomorrow he'll leave you high and dry, and he could say the most cruel things. So he's cut off a lot of people over the years. But what also emerges from this book is Lou Reed's artistry. He studied poetry, and he was under the influence of an academic called Delmore Schwartz, and Lou Reed became a poet himself, of course. For the casual listener like me, this was always far from apparent. Like I said, he was just another rock singer. However, I've now realized that despite his mental difficulties, psychosis perhaps, and his drug taking, he's someone worthy of much more respect than he's often given, at least for the casual listener. So what did I what turned me around, really? Well, part of it is that after I read the book, there was lots of references to his interest in poetry, and I managed to, in one of my online searches, I managed to find this particular book, which is called "I'll Be Your Mirror." It's Lou Reed's lyrics, as you can see here. It was pretty cheap, so I thought I'd buy it anyway. But it's really, really astonishing. And one of the things that comes through is that he's almost a chronicler of life in the dark underbelly of New York. And it reminds me of this book that I bought and read in the late 1970s. Thought it was edgy, certainly recommended. Lots of depravity and darkness in this book. And although I can't remember the plot or even the depictions of particular activities within it, the feeling, the atmosphere that this book created has really stayed with me. And there was one time I went to one of my trips to New York. I was there for about 10 days on one time with a couple of male friends. And we were hanging out doing the usual sites, the Guggenheim or World Trade Center, Central Park, loads of the regular sites. But we also went to see quite a few gigs. And some of the gigs were in some of the less salubrious parts of town. And you'd go into these places, there'd be basement rooms, and there'd be graffiti and scribble all over the walls. The floors were sticky. The toilets stank, or really rank. And it was worse. These places were a lot worse than even the student sort of places I used to frequent when I was younger. And you can easily imagine that Lou Reed was talking about the kind of people who would frequent these places, not as tourists as we were, but as regulars, and some of the shenanigans they got up to in terms of sexual deviancy and drug taking. So that was a kind of a bit of a flavour of New York that's kind of stayed with me, and that book, Last Exit to Brooklyn, was as definitely describes it in narrative form, in prose form rather than more than Lou Reed does. Obviously, or it's the equal of Lou Reed's poetry and lyric writing. And he also, one of the things that I like about New York is that he employs a writing device that kind of draws you in. So rather than talking the first person or talk generally, he names names. So you get this idea of, he takes you straight into the scenario, straight into a circumstance where someone is named. Then maybe there's another name in the song as well, and you get that realism in the lyrics to such an extent that there's a real good balance between the music and the lyrics. It's not just one or the other. I mean, some of the, I like Leonard Cohen as well, of course. And Leonard Cohen, I think particularly the early stuff, the music was very sparse and the lyrics completely dominated. But Lou Reed's got the balance just about right, in my judgment. So yeah, he talks about real people, and each song is like a short story that elicits incredulity, horror, disgust even. and also some sympathy for the protagonists. I think it's fair to say that one can enjoy Lou Reed's music in a rather passive way. It's passing you by, it's on the random play, or it can be studied with real attention. And if you do that, its emotional impact is far greater. So, New York, about 55 minutes long, an album for the CD age. It's full of vitality and drive. It makes you listen out for the lyrics, as I've said. As you nod in political agreement, the need to rescue people from their worst excesses is as urgent and as important as ever. And if you believe what the rumours are, is that New York is a lot less safe in 2022 than it was in, say, 20 years ago. And it's returning back to where it was not just an edgy place to be, but a somewhat dangerous place to be, as it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I imagine. But it also makes you kind of chuckle in admiration for the wit and the insight in the writing. And it makes you sing along, even if that's in the kind of the same half singing, half talking voice that Lou Reed style he's noted for. But when he bursts forth with some real impassioned singing in the climax of Strawman on side 2, it kind of makes you punch the air. You think that he really can sing after all. But yeah, Lou Reed, New York, one of my favorite albums. I strongly recommend it, especially if you are one of these casual Lou Reed listeners, as I am or have been. You pick this album up, it stands alone as an absolute milestone in his career. Most people go back to Transformer because Satellite of Love, Perfect Day, Walk on the Wild Side. It's kind of a bit of a quasi surrogate, maybe greatest hits album, but this is a superior album in my judgment. It works perfectly if you take it in one back to front or beginning to end sitting. It actually is a real work of art. So there you go, Lou Reed's New York. As I say, first video for a while. I'll try and get busier. If there's any particular albums you want me to talk about, you get an idea if you've been watching some of the previous ones of how extensive my collection is and how kind of passionate I am about particular types of music. I'll take recommendations, but also, of course, comment in the add a comment in the comments below. They're always welcome. And I'll do my best to reply. Which I do to almost all of them. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Cheers.